Dr. Ben Carson says that people don't want to leave prison because it's just too damn comfortable. Interesting. Now, he said this at an event in Arlington, Virginia, on Tuesday. Dr. Ben Carson revealed that he had also visited a federal prison. So what did he have to say about his visit and the accommodations of such prison? Well, for that I go to the Washington Post. He said, I was flabbergasted. Oh my goodness. Flabbergasted. By what? By how terrible the accommodations were? I mean, it's prison. Prison's not exactly great, right? Well, apparently, if you're Ben Carson, you think prison is awesome. I was flabbergasted by the accommodations, the exercise equipment, the libraries, and the computers. He said that he was told that a lot of times when it's about time for one of the guys to be discharged, especially in the wintertime, that they just do something just so they can stay in prison. Prison is so awesome that when faced with the cold, well, and you're going to get released, well, you don't want to go. You want to stay where it's warm in the prison. Well, for some of those people, where the fuck do they have to go? Look, man, on his point, and he does have a valid point, that some people do go to prison so they can get things like, I don't know, healthcare. We've done stories on that before. Where people do something wrong. There was a guy that sold like a $1 candy bar and turned himself in just so he could get health care to prevent him from dying. He couldn't afford health care anywhere else. But in prison, health care is a right. Well, health care should be a human right, no matter what, for everyone. But, I digress. All right, so Ben Carson continues. He says, I think that we need to sometimes ask ourselves, are we creating an environment that is conducive to comfort where a person would want to stay? Well, if you're fucking homeless and don't have anything, and maybe have a mental condition, having a place to stay versus not having any place to stay, especially in the places where we've essentially criminalized homelessness and made it, put spike strips on benches or well, not on benches, but on overpasses. There was a story of a church that we did that would actually release water so it would pour onto people laying in the doorway, to homeless people. Well, in those conditions, I guess he would understand why people would like, yeah, well, I'll just go to jail because at least I won't be out in the freezing cold or get water dumped on me or have to lay on homeless spike strips. I guess given that alternative, you can kind of understand. But of course, Ben Carson doesn't quite understand that nuance, or at least as far as I could tell from what I read. Now he continues, versus an environment where we maybe provide them an opportunity for rehabilitation, but is not a place where they would find particularly comfortable. Now, this may make his head explode. Because if he thinks that prisons here are too comfortable, just imagine what he would be like if he found out what Norwegian prisons were like. The accommodations that murderer and neo-Nazi extreme right-winger Anders Breivik lives in. Those accommodations. Remember, there's a recent story about Anders Breivik that basically showed how angry he was because he didn't get the newest PlayStation. He doesn't have a PlayStation 4. He only has a PlayStation 3. Oh, boo fucking who. That story right there would make Ben Carson's head fucking explode. Good. Oh my God. And look, even if you think those are too comfy, which I wouldn't blame you if you do, I think that it might even be stretching it, but there's a reason that they do it. And the proof is in the pudding. Now, the recidivism rates in Norway are far lower than they are in America. Now, there was a study done on worldwide recidivism rates, right? And I'll have the link in the description to that study. Now, according to this, Norway has a 20% rate. Well, that sounds really high, right? Well, not when you compare it to the rate of America, which stands at 52% recidivism. So, just over half of people that get released from prison end up back in prison, where it's far more harsher here in America than it is in Norway. And yet their recidivism rate is much, much lower. What the fuck? Well, quotes from the story show the difference, and I guess it shows why there's such a big difference between America and Norway. Now, according to the study, the Norwegian penal philosophy is that traditional repressive prisons do not work, and that treating prisoners humanely improves their chances of reintegrating into society. This is achieved by a guiding principle of normality. Now, what is that? Now, basically, that means that within the exception of freedom of movement, prisoners retain all other rights, and life in the prison should resemble life on the outside to the greatest extent possible. That actually makes logical sense. If you stop treating prisoners like they're inhuman, then they won't act like they're inhuman. Now, of course, there are limits to that, right? The other purpose of prisons, other than rehabilitation, should be housing away people that are dangerous to society. Your rapists, your murderers, your terrorists, right? I have no problem with locking those people away for the rest of their lives in less than awesome conditions. I'm okay with that. But everybody else, well, maybe you should treat them like human beings and not fucking animals. You treat people like an animal, they're going to act like an animal. You treat somebody like a human being, and guess what? They're going to be a human being. They're going to be able to transfer back into society and be a productive member. Now, another thing that they do that we don't do here in America is that they actually, once you release somebody from prison in Norway, you give them the tools to become a productive citizen. In America, we just kick them out the door and say, have fun. We'll probably see you back here in a year because you have absolutely zero opportunity. Now, what they do in Norway is different. According to the study, prisoners are not left to their own devices upon release. There is a safety net. Oh my God, a safety net for felons. How dare you? The government guarantees that it will do everything possible to ensure that released prisoners have housing, employment, education, as well as health care and addiction treatment. While Americans may scoff, and this is a quote, at the treatment of prisoners in other countries, particularly Norway, where a convict can be sentenced to as little as 8 years for murder, the low incarceration and recidivism rates suggest that the normalization approach works. Now, there's another interesting thing that they have in this study. It says that lower levels of income inequality also lowers imprisonment and recidivism rates. Very interesting. So, helping with income inequality actually reduces prison and recidivism rates. Oh, you mean you actually give somebody an opportunity to make a life for themselves and they don't turn to a life of crime? Oh, shocking. How fucking amazing is that? It's about the most common sense thing in the world, but here in America, we don't operate on common sense. Of course. Now, Ben Carson is going to go on to say something that I absolutely do agree with, and he makes a lot of sense here. He says, we're not doing things the right way. A lot of people that we incarcerate don't need to be incarcerated. Thank you. That's about the most sense I've ever heard Dr. Ben Carson make. That is great. Now, I don't know exactly what he plans to do about that. If he ever becomes president, which there's about a 0% chance of that. But nonetheless, it's good to hear him say an actual truth. We put too many people in prison. And for stupid things. Things like nonviolent drug offenses. And of course, ridiculous tough on crime laws. We put teachers in prison for like 20 plus years in prison for cheating on tests, for helping students cheat. Isn't that ridiculous? Or for somebody having what appeared to be sex on the beach, 20 years in prison. Oh, we're so fucked up here in America. We're so backwards when it comes to our justice system. Jesus. Those are the things that need to be reformed. Those kind of really harsh prison sentences. We need to take a look at how we actually look at prisoners, how we look at our justice system. And we need to reform it. And we need to make these changes to reduce the possibilities of reoffending. Now, a lot of people in prison are there because they have mental health issues. What you increase access to mental health care, and you also reduce income inequality, and actually make sure that people who've been to prison can actually reintegrate into society by being able to get jobs. One of the things that prevents people from actually getting back to society is that a lot of employers will be like, oh, you committed a crime? You're never working again. Well, how are you supposed to get back on your feet? Now, it makes sense to put certain limits on certain crimes. For example, if you're embezzling money, if you're stealing money and stuff, I can understand why you would get rejected as a bank teller. But if you're smoking a doobie, you shouldn't be barred from anything, from getting a job in anywhere. Nonviolent drug offenses. Remember, that's a lot. That's a big chunk of what people are in prison for these days. So just remember that. Obviously, it should be more of a case-by-case basis on whether or not what jobs some people shouldn't be able to get. But overall, helping people get jobs and get back on their feet, that's going to be better for them. And it's also going to be better for society because we're going to end up spending less money on prisons. And overall, that's a good thing. And also, treating people like they're human beings while they're in prison and not throwaways is also a pretty damn good start. If we could just do that first, that'd be great. Instead of course, doing what some people, politicians, Democrat and Republican, call for. And that's making prison even worse than it actually already is.